recording this, and we're going to use this later on. I want to introduce you to our three panelists. First is Allie Wall, there in the middle. Allie she joined Safe Harbor in February of 2022 as the Human Trafficking Program Manager. In this role, she oversees all the operations of the Human Trafficking Program, which includes emergency and transitional human trafficking shelters, as well as the Human Trafficking Community Case Management and Hotline services. She supervises a team of case managers and client service advocates and ensures the delivery of client-centered crisis intervention. Before she came to Safe Harbor, she was employed at the Office of Virginia Attorney General Mark Herring as the Human Trafficking Case Manager for minor victims. She has a bachelor's degree in communication and sociology from George Mason University and a Master of Clinical Mental Health Counseling from Walden University, and she is a licensed professional counselor. Dr. Fidelma, did I pronounce that right?
You did, yes.
Fidelma Rigby. She is a professor of OBGYN at VCU. She is the volunteer medical director for the Pregnancy Resource Center. She was born in Galway, Ireland, and grew up in Culpeper, Virginia for the most part. Has a history major, undergrad at Princeton University, and medical degree at University of Virginia. She did a residency and fellowship in 9 more years with LSU and a big charity in New Orleans, Virginia, before coming to VCU in 2005. She has done approximately 20 talks and presentations locally, nationally, and internationally to help educate, especially healthcare professionals, on the topic of human trafficking. And then finally, here at the end, we have Linda Scott. Linda is an attorney in private practice since 2015. She is a criminal justice attorney for the Central Virginia area and a guardian ad litem for children. Linda is a former prosecutor for Hanover and Henrico counties, and for over 8 years, she was an attorney in the Richmond Public Defender's Office, leaving that office as a deputy public defender in 2005. Linda represents victims and survivors of human trafficking. I want to thank you all for being here today. Thank you for the work that you do. I don't know how to describe it. It's just I don't know, I have a lot of anger when it comes to this issue. But I want to thank you all for what you do to help the people who were victims of this crime. Let me just one of you to respond. Tell me a good definition to help us understand. I know we've seen what human trafficking is, but in a definition sense, to tell us what human trafficking is and what are the different types of trafficking. We've seen mainly sex trafficking, but there are others. If you could tell us some of those.
We're both.
Fight for the mic.
So basically,
Could you use the mic just for the recording?
yeah. So human trafficking is the selling of humans against their will. Some people refer to it as a more modern form of slavery. We try not to use the word slavery now because it has other more different connotations, but it's when you take a human being and you force them to do things against their will. So we are talking about sex trafficking from the film today. Unfortunately, there are other forms of trafficking that we refer to as labor trafficking, which again occur both in the United States as well as throughout the world, where people come and are forced to labor in terms of, we've had maids in hotels in Virginia Beach. You have day laborers, who come here to America for the prize of having a job, and then they find that their passports and whatnot are taken away from them, and they work not for themselves, but for whenever and whoever their person who brought them here tells them to. And so it's a very, very broad topic. The other thing is that vocabulary matters. When we're talking about it in the legal sense, we use the word victim, and indeed in all of the code, they are officially victims. When you're talking about it from from my viewpoint, which is from healthcare, we try very, very hard not to use the word victim, but to use trafficked person or to use survivor. Because these people have been told for so very long that they belong to somebody else. And that is one of the reasons there's complex trauma bonding, where these people are with these traffickers for years and years, and so we try to give them back their personhood, which is a very difficult thing to do, but so we try to be very careful in the vocabulary that we use.
All right, so Fidelma, you approached, you deal with human trafficking from the medical field for the most part. Allie, can you tell us a little bit about where you deal with it from, and then Linda, you as well?
Yeah, and I want to add, a lot of people think that human trafficking is only the sale of like sex in exchange for money, but that is not always the case. So to make it like a really just broad definition, it is like the exchange of a sexual act for something of value. So that can mean, money, but it can mean drugs, it can mean housing, it can mean clothing, but anything of value. And people seem to forget that. I also want to point out that in the movie, it did kind of allude to the abduction and the kidnapping a little bit, but I really, really like to let people know that I have not had a single case that involved kidnapping or abduction. People think that they're driving around in white vans and snatching kids off the street, and that's not what's happening. They don't have to do that. Because if you think about it, if I am a trafficker and I make you think that I love you and I'm going to take care of you, I'm going to be a much better victim for you, right? I'm going to do what you say because I believe that you love me. But if I had to kidnap you and force you to do this, we might get a little bit of a different result. So I'd like to let people know that that's just not how it's happening. In the work I do, I work with both minors and adults. Most of my experience is with minors. I serve about 15 minor victims right now across the state of Virginia. And then I also run, as he mentioned, the adult shelter through Safe Harbor. Was there something you specifically wanted me to address about that?
No, I just wanted to know how, in regards to human trafficking, what is your role? How do you engage victims?
You guys stop me because I can talk a long time about that. But for my minor victims, I do anything from assessment. So going and determining, is this truly human trafficking? A lot of times the referrals are like, we think so, but we're not sure. So I can go in and a judge might order for me to do an assessment. I go into detention centers, places like that, conduct assessments, then determine the level of care they need. Do they need to be in a locked residential facility, which is a place where kids live in kind of a treatment home, but it's locked and they have services throughout every single day? Can they be at home with counseling and things like that? So I help them get the right services they need. I support them through court. If they have to testify against an abuser, I support them in that aspect. So whatever they need. And then for our adults, we help them obviously provide housing, stability, treatment, and then help them get back on their feet.
Okay. All right, Linda, can you kind of answer the same thing, please?
I can. So my role is twofold. So I'm a guardian ad litem for children. That's how Allie and I met, because I'm a guardian for a young lady who has been trafficked. And so we met in that way. My law degree says attorney and counselor at law, and I really take that seriously. So I get to know my clients that are appointed to me by the court, either appointed as a guardian ad litem or appointed because, as you saw in the film, the victims of human traffickers often are arrested. And so I will be appointed to them as their criminal defense attorney because they don't have money that they can hire their own attorney. So they routinely get appointed an attorney. Now, when I say attorney and counselor at law, I know I'm not a counselor. But what I do is get to know my clients so that I can refer them to the proper services. And that takes time. Because when I'm appointed to usually an adult for a criminal offense, and a lot of times they're charged with prostitution or operating a body house, which is like a hotel room or a house where prostitution and sexual acts take place. So they're charged with that. Routinely, I can actually not even think of a case where drugs aren't charged as well, which is a felony, because a lot of times they are using illegal substances to kind of get through what they have to get through. And so because of that, when I come in, I mean, I meet with them immediately. I kind of look at it just like the doctor did, where when they come to me, at first they're a victim, even though they may not believe that they are. But then I always tell them, and you're gonna be a survivor, because I think it's important. I agree. I think that they need to know that they were not in control, and so they're not responsible, they're not at fault, but then that they can get through this to the life that they deserve. And so I see that as my role. And so I guess what I would say is I have seen like kind of 3 different types of victims. I kind of wrote on some notes, but I've seen the prostitutes that were beaten in for gang initiation and then kind of passed around. I've seen deception where they thought they were going for a modeling job or they thought they were going for a babysitting job, and then it became an abduction situation where they were trafficked like all around the East Coast, all around both coasts. I have asked some of my clients, because you see in the movie that she says, there were times I guess I could have said something. Well, or I could have left because there's a phone. And that's actually not true, because when you're talking to these young ladies, they don't know where they are. They get moved from city to city to city. And she's like, I could never pick up a phone because I don't know where to say I am. I don't know what hotel I'm in. I don't know what county or state I'm in. When one of my clients was arrested, she thought she was in North Carolina and she was in Henrico, Virginia. She had no idea. And so I've seen that. I agree with Allie. A lot of what I've seen is the boyfriend you're doing. It's kind of like you left from a bad situation. I'm gonna take care of you. I love you. You gotta do this for us. There may be one or more people in their family that are prostituting. And so there's a big bond with their pimp, because this person loves me. This person's taking care of me. It's only if I'm bad that bad things happen to me. And then I've also seen immigrant situations where they come to America with the American dream, and they think they're coming for employment, and then their passport is taken, and they are forced into prostitution. So I've seen those type of individuals, and I think that each of those types, that's where it's so important that we have, doctors and we have counselors, because that all involves different types of therapy and different types of communication so that they can come from a victim to a survivor.
Okay, let me ask you this. For all of us, how would we recognize someone who is being trafficked? And, what kind of person is at risk of this? But the main question is, how do you recognize a person being trafficked?
So the main thing that we see in the people who are trafficked is vulnerability. Okay? And you see people from every walk of life in this. We have the image of the person who's abducted, maybe overseas and brought over here, and those people certainly exist. But so does the child who went to a very nice high school in a suburb of DC, who ends up going to a party with the popular kids, getting a date rape drug, being gang raped, and then being blackmailed into going out of the house every night. So the key thing that the traffickers look for is someone with low self-esteem. So often from a broken family, sometimes from the LGBT community, but someone who doesn't think very highly of herself. And then they become bonded with this person who is suddenly very nice to them and giving them all these nice clothes, and they actually have web pages where they talk to each other about what are the girls like these days, how did you lure your people in, and then the boom comes down at some stage, and they're in this situation, and many times they might not even realize that they're being trafficked, and they think they're stupid, they think it's my fault, if only I hadn't done this, or if only I hadn't done that. And I'll never be able to get out of this situation. So sometimes it's just educating them, even at a very slow pace, about the fact that they may be actually in a traffic situation. And I think from what I try and tell the healthcare providers, a lot of times it's spidey sense. That her answers don't make sense, right? So she'll come in with somebody who's very controlling, okay? A sister or an aunt or a cousin who's always answering the questions for them. Oh no, they don't speak English, you know. Oh no, I have to interpret for them. Oh no, I can't step out for the exam. And so that's our first thing. The second thing, one of the reasons I ended up getting involved with this through Faye Chum of Impact Virginia, is that there used to be the patients we were very frustrated with. They would have children and they wouldn't know how many children, they wouldn't know where they had the children, they wouldn't get a good OB care. Why? Because they were moved from city to city to city, not even necessarily knowing where they are. And then they could at times become very hostile, and they certainly did never come in for consistent prenatal care. So it's this person who has this controlling person, or who that doesn't ever have their documents with them. What do you mean you don't have your insurance card? What do you mean you don't know your address? So someone who seems to be under control from somebody else and doesn't seem to really be in control of their life.
No, I agree with all that. That's 100% correct. And to kind of give some ideas for you guys to look out for, especially when like looking at minors, some of the things that we see are like extra cell phones, because they have gotten smart. So where before it was, oh, they've stopped going to school and they're missing, right? And there's a difference between runaway and throwaways, what we call. So when a kid runs away, a parent reports it, that's a runaway. Well, there are so many children out here that are missing that haven't even been reported and no one's looking for them. But the pimps have gotten smarter, and I had a victim that they took her to school every single day. They took her to the doctor, they took her to the dentist. It looked very normal. But things we look out for would be like hotel room keys, extra cell phones, potential branding, which would be tattoos, runaways, missing school, things like that give us those red flags that potentially this could be a victim. They might have a lot of knowledge of the street life. They might use certain language that indicates that they're involved in something. But to identify someone, I agree 100% with what you said. There's no picture I could paint for you besides vulnerabilities. They will truly go on Instagram and Facebook and they will scroll till they see a post about, my boyfriend broke up with me, my parents are getting a divorce, something sad that they can attach to, and they will jump in their inbox and leave a message, and it might be the first person that said, I'm sorry that you're going through this. Let me listen to what's going on. Tell me. And they grasp them in because no one else has asked them how they're doing and how they're managing with their emotions. So it's like, this person cares about me, they love me, they're gonna take care of me, no one else has. And then that feeds into what they use later of, if someone cared about you, they would have come and gotten you. No one's looking for you. No one will love you like I do. After this, do you think someone's gonna love you? They will play into that. So every victim has some vulnerability, whether it's mental health, they've been previously sexually abused, but there is a factor in every single case that we can pinpoint that made them vulnerable for this situation.
I think legally, what I've seen is that individuals have been in a hotel room, and it's not just like you think, like the cheaper hotel rooms. It's every hotel room that's out there that there has been an arrest. And so individuals have seen, well, somebody keeps knocking on this door again and again and again. And so they're like, it's across the hall, and what's going on? And you have that spidey sense where you're like, something's not right. And go ahead and call the police and say, you know what, something's not right. Because they can do an investigation and save someone. The other thing certainly is like you'll see, at truck stops sometimes or gas stations, you have this young girl going into this car, and it's kind of one of those things, if you see something that you're concerned about, report it so that a police officer can do the investigation. I always tell parents, I'm like, you paid for that cell phone is yours. that computer is yours. So monitoring is not because you don't trust your child, it's because you don't trust everybody else that's out there that could be praying and you know, saying, I'm a 17-year-old boy, and they turn out to be a 35-year-old man. So kids are vulnerable, and adults can kind of see it. Like when you look at some of the text messages and the pictures, as an adult, you would immediately see this is wrong. As a child, you know, they are smart. These predators are smart. They kind of start with, I'm listening to you, I care about you, and then you'll see it, the conversation turn. You'll see pictures, you know, kind of being shared. And at that point, you know that, that you should step in and you should call somebody, such as the police, so that they can go ahead and start an investigation. But I'm really big on monitoring your children, they're monitoring their electronics, but also having the conversations with them so that they know that not every adult is trustworthy. And so they know that if somebody comes up to them and says, you are beautiful, I'm gonna take pictures of you, I'm a photographer, I work with this magazine, you know, you check them out, you have your child say, wait a minute, nothing's free like that, so you give it to your parents and they'll contact you. And if it's legitimate, then you can go, but you never send your child alone. So those are just, I think, things that we all can do to kind of protect everyone that we have that concern about.
And runaways are especially vulnerable. I mean, one of the other things that caught me was when they were telling us at some of the talks about the people who wait at the bus stops in New York City for runaways who get off the bus there to befriend them.
And to add to that, the likelihood of, especially a minor, which that would make you run away, but to be on the street within 2 days is highly likely that you'll be picked up by a pin because you are highly vulnerable. You have no income, you have no food, you have nowhere to stay, and you need those things. So you have a need, and they have a way for you to get that need met. So it is highly, highly likely that you will get picked up, a child will get picked up off the street within 2 days of being a runaway.
How prevalent is trafficking in our area, in Richmond area?
It's very prevalent. So in Virginia, if you look at Virginia, the #1 area right now is the Virginia Beach area. #2 is Northern Virginia, and #3 is Richmond. And what plays a role in that is, one, our highways, right? We have easy access right up and down the East Coast. So I have girls that will either be sent out of state or that will have been sent out of state to here because we have tourist locations. All 3 of those places are big tourist locations. Richmond has a lot of truck stops. In Virginia Beach, we have a lot of a big military presence, and outside of military bases are strip clubs. So I had a 12-year-old being sold in the strip clubs in Virginia Beach. People think that's crazy. How can that happen? These things are happening. Human trafficking is huge in Virginia and a big problem in Richmond. In less than 2 years, we identified over 21 that I've worked with, and that is just the tip, even if you count that as the tip of the iceberg of what we're dealing with. So it's huge. It's a big issue in this area.
And they try to do things like shutting down Craigslist, and the problem with that, as they mentioned, is that then they go underground, and it gets harder to find them. So yes, you don't want legitimate web pages helping out traffickers, but then the other problem is it gets harder to find, and they are getting harder.
And COVID really increased it. There was an increase in domestic violence and child abuse and in trafficking during COVID because everyone was at home. People lost their jobs. Familial trafficking, which is family members trafficking family members, really went on the rise because people lost their jobs. So now I'm gonna make my wife go sell herself. I'm gonna make my child sell herself. I had a mom and grandparents selling children. So it really went on the rise because there was no one to report it to, right? You couldn't go to your school counselor, you couldn't go tell your friend, you couldn't tell anyone. So no one was seeing bruises or children hurt or things like that. So it really increased. Plus children were on their phones and on the internet 100% more of the time than they were when they would be in school. So now we're seeing a huge increase in victims coming out because they were being trafficked during COVID.
All right, well, in the film, especially with this young lady who's a lot of the stories about, it took 3 years for her case to be brought. Why in the world did it take 3 years?
Virginia's a lot quicker than that. So that we don't see that. I would say, I think that we routinely see cases come to court. Now, if it's a victim of a human trafficking and she's charged with a criminal charge, a lot of times they'll continue her case out because they want to make sure that she gets assistance and gets help. And just as a side note, like since 2013, there's been legislation that that has been proposed to expunge the records of a victim that's been human trafficked. And it hasn't passed. I think it even was up this year and it didn't pass. I thought it did, but I just checked and it didn't. So that's something that's out there that we're looking at. But as far as for the abusers, they want to continue the trial as long as possible because their hope is, as I said earlier, a lot of the individuals that have been trafficked, that they've pimped, they may have a drug problem, they have low self-esteem, so they will try for continuances because their belief is they will not come to trial and then I'll be released. So, but the courts in Virginia really don't allow so many continuances. So, I mean, I think you would go to trial 6 months to a year in Virginia. That would be the latest that I've seen. Now, even with COVID, I would still say we would see that other than if they had asked for a jury trial, in which case during COVID things have been pushed back with jury trials. But as you saw, those gentlemen were incarcerated, and we've got really aggressive prosecutors that work very hard to educate the police officers as to what you should do, like getting search warrants for cell phones so that there's more evidence that's out there so that they can offer a plea so that their victim who's become a survivor, hopefully at that point, does not have to testify. In this area, they've trained the police officers, they've trained all of the hotel staff so that they could recognize it. And they really do, from the first, start to talk to individuals about, do you want to go to the doctor? I mean, they will take a victim of human trafficking to have a sexual assault exam with a sexual assault nurse, you know, so that because they believe that they are rape victims, you know, so they're like, we're gonna treat you just as we would with any victim of sexual assaults, which is a really wonderful thing. In the beginning though, I think the strongest thing that we've all dealt with is that they don't see themselves as a victim. Like they're making a choice. They're making a choice for their family. And so a lot of times I will say, okay, well, I understand, right? I mean, you're doing this because your family needs money. So what is he doing? Like, what sex acts is he doing? And they laugh at me because they're like, he's not doing anything. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, you're all in this together. So if you're doing this, why isn't he doing this? And it kind of like they think about it a little bit, and then they realize when they're in the jail that he's not putting money on their books. He didn't come to the bond ocean like they thought he was going to come to. And so all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, you know, it is not. And then they're willing to go to the programs that the prosecutors will say, we will absolutely bring him out of jail if they want to go to safe harbor, if they want to go to a doctor. I mean, if I say, look, she doesn't want to testify against the person, but she wants a medical exam, the prosecutors do it, you know, the judges do it. I mean, it's all really about trying to make sure that that the person not be victimized again by the legal system or by their pimps.
Yeah, a part of the issue in dealing with these folks is the complex trauma that they have. You know, there's the trauma bonding syndrome where they desperately love the person who's beating them, and it takes domestic violence and it brings it up on steroids. And so, you know, ideally speaking, and this cannot happen for everybody, but there are houses such as Letitia's house in Williamsburg. Ideally speaking, for the girls who have been in this for years and years, what you want to do is you want to give them a year of wraparound services where they'll get the counseling, where they'll get the job opportunities, where they'll get the lawyers to help them through all the court cases that their pimp has got them involved in. And even then, you know, Letitia's house is trying to have halfway houses for them a year after that, because even when they get out of the wraparound services. So it's just a very, very complex problem to try and get particularly the adult victims who've been at it for years, the services that they need.
What would you say is the ballpark figure of the criminal proceeds from human trafficking?
It is the number 2 criminal enterprise in the world. It is second only to drugs, and it may soon surpass drugs because, like they said, you can sell a human being again and again and again.
Yeah, it used to be drugs and then weapons, and it has since surpassed the sale of illegal weapons.
Well, one last question, and then I'll see if anybody in the audience has it. Let's say I'm riding down Jeff Davis or wherever, and I see a girl standing there. How, and this is a weird question, how would I know if she is a prostitute who is choosing to be out there, and the difference between someone who is being forced to be out there? And I know I hope you understand what I'm asking.
We understand. I could probably, well, I would argue that no one really wakes up and says, this is what I want to do, right? Now, do some do it what we would call like survival sex, because they need to make money for certain things? Absolutely. But the likelihood of them doing it by themselves for long is highly unlikely, that they're not going to be picked up and controlled by a pimp. And honestly, I wouldn't say that that would be, you know, for us to determine or wonder, and that if you are concerned about something like that, to still contact someone, and that would be their job to kind of figure out. And obviously children can't be prostitutes.
Right.
Yeah, from the healthcare standpoint, if we suspect that a minor is being trafficked, it's an automatic reporting, okay? For an adult person, however, it is quite different, and that you have to understand that when the adult person is being trafficked, there can be many reasons that they don't want to come out of the life. The trafficker may know their family members, they may be threatening them, they may have no other means of supporting themselves. So our job as healthcare providers in the adult setting is to say, hey, you know, this is something that's going on in the community. Many times people who have tattoos such as you have, or, you know, don't have very poor access to health care. Sometimes this can be the situation that they're in. If you want to share things with me, we're happy to hear what you have to say and to help you. But we we can't come in like a knight in shining armor and rescue them.
I mean, and that's very important to remember. Like, we are not rescuers. We don't ever rescue
Except for children.
Well, what I'm saying is that we shouldn't even put that on ourselves. Like, we're not the rescuer. We are recovering them, right? We're not rescuing them. We're not the heroes in the capes. I mean, we are all great people, but we are recovering them. And going kind of back to the victim piece, as a therapist and running a clinical program for minors for years, I learned that it was important in the beginning to identify them as a victim because they didn't see themselves as a victim. They saw themselves as a girlfriend, right? So I started to learn that we had to call it what it was. We're not calling him your boyfriend. We're not calling you his girlfriend. We're calling this abuse, and we're calling you a victim. And then when they're through the program and they're graduating, like, they are a survivor. But they have to first learn that they were a victim before they can really move through treatment and work on that. And I will say that there is a difference between children and adults, like you mentioned. And when it comes to like the legal proceedings, when it comes to adults, you have to prove force, fraud, or coercion occurred. But when it comes to children, you do not. Automatically, it is considered human trafficking.
All right, does anybody have a question that they'd like to ask? I'm going to come to you with this microphone.
Is it always only females?
No.
Excellent, excellent.
And what are the age range from youngest to oldest that you guys have dealt with?
Well, I will say on my caseload, the youngest I've had would be 12, but I have assisted law enforcement with smaller children I'd probably say 6 was the youngest that we dealt with. But I would say on my caseload, about 11 to 17 for my children. But then when it comes to the adults in our house, we have anywhere from 18 to over 40s, and into 50s that we have worked with in the shelter. And when it comes to boys, is it happening? 100%. But what we have to remember is a social stigma. There's already a social stigma when it comes to our girls, because when you go and say, oh, this is a young girl and she was raped by her dad, everyone is so sad and feels so bad for her, as they should. But then you'll take one of my girls, right, who will say, oh yeah, I slept with over 300 men in exchange for meth. I loved it, I'll keep doing it. She's a victim. But because of how they can present and the situations they've been through, there is no sympathy for that. Oftentimes people will view that as, excuse my language in the church, but like a slut, right? That's what they would consider that, versus being a victim. So there's already a social stigma when it comes to sex trafficking, but when you add boys in there, the stigma is even higher. I have argued with law enforcement to view it the same way as girls. They'll take a case, and because the boy will have children porn on his computer, even though adult men sent it, he is in trouble and he's the criminal. And I'm like, would you do this the same if a female had this on their computer? So there needs to be more education and more support for our male victims, because they need to know that they are a victim, but the social stigma around it, they're less likely to come forward, less likely to admit it, and everyone assumes that they are gay if they have been trafficked.
And having said that, the LGBT community is also, that's one of the vulnerable populations that they will get to.
And I've had a couple of clients that are male that are, they're arrested for drugs and, spidey senses again, and you just start talking to them and you realize that they are the victim of trafficking. And they'll tell me it was since they were a teenager, but there is such a stigma with them too, that they don't want anyone to know. And so all I can do is provide resources for them, because I know, they won't let me use that as a defense. They won't let me go to the prosecution. And because they're an adult now, if they were a child, there are things that I could do as a defense attorney. I could get a guardian ad litem, because a guardian ad litem is a lawyer that stands in the shoes of the best interest of the child. So as a criminal defense attorney for a child, if a child says, I don't want you to say something, I don't say it, but I get a guardian ad litem because they will say it. And so that's how you protect a child in the legal system. But because the 2 individual males that I'm thinking of, because they were over the age of 18, he didn't want me to tell the prosecutor, because I said, once I tell him this, we'll go down a different path of therapy and getting you out of this life. And it's a huge stigma that he didn't want that to happen. So that was an excellent question though, because we just automatically focus, I think, on the women, and you're right, it certainly does happen to men. I was a prosecutor for 7 years. I've been a defense attorney for more, but I was a prosecutor for 7 years. And so I would see child pornography, I prosecuted that. And I saw victims that were infants, unfortunately, that were trafficked. And there are pictures in my mind that I will never get out of my head. And there were some that were trafficked so badly that I started recognizing them. Oh, that's her at 3, that's her at 7, that's her, you start recognizing the child because her father trafficked her throughout her life until he was arrested. And the police were able to find him and arrest him and save her, but that has happened. So I think we just all got to be aware that it's, not a certain age, and if you question, you should tell law enforcement and talk to them about it so that they could just kind of check. You could call CPS. There are things that we can do, I think, as adults to just protect our children.
And don't forget the labor trafficking. That's going to have a lot of male victims as well.
And to add to the age, I don't want to scare anyone, but what you said about being babies is correct. And that's why it's so important to watch what you post online, right? You should not be posting babies in the bathtub with no shirt on. What we think is innocent, what you had mentioned earlier, you know, a dad holding his daughter upside down and her panties are showing, but it's innocent because she's 5. It's not innocent. Someone has found that picture, someone is using that picture, and they're not using it for anything of good.
The 3 men that were involved in Kat's situation, why did each one get a different sentence? And why was the man that she was most afraid of given the least amount of time?
You know, a lot of times it depends on what they can prove evidentiary-wise, and then like who rolls first. You know, that's always the first. You know, who's gonna be the cooperating witness gets the least amount of time. And so prosecutors, you know, they want to talk to the police. They want a thorough investigation, because what they don't want to do is have the person that's the most culpable get the least amount of sentence. You know, they really do try, I think, to prevent that from happening. But I also think, especially like in this situation for her, when it was going on and on and on, I mean, I was relieved to see that she didn't have to go through a trial, you know, because that just is, I mean, here she is surviving now. She's had therapy, she needs to get on with her life, and she would have to relive it 3 separate times for 3 separate trials. So, you know, I think that's why, you know, we want everything to be fair and we want everyone to get the same sentence, but I do think they look on who was the person in charge, who's the person that did the physical violence, who's the person that accepted responsibility. The judge looks at all of that when they're making a decision, and the prosecutor as well when they're making the recommendations.
Okay.
It's okay. So my understanding is we have like a regional task force that works against human trafficking. Are they doing like what they were doing in the
Yes.
video? They are.
Yeah, for sure. COVID definitely impacted it to some degree, but they definitely are. Yes, 100%.
All right, well, one last question. I so appreciate what you all do to help those survivors who are recovering. What can we do?
I think the best answer, one is to be educated, like to know the facts. There are a lot of false things going around on Facebook and Instagram saying, oh, this person's calling everyone and it's human trafficking. No, that's not correct. That's not how they operate. So stop sharing things that you do not know are facts. Make sure that you're educated correctly, and then when you are, educate others. Educate your children, educate these teens, educate everyone you know about the warning signs. The other thing is to get involved if you want, right? We have a volunteer program. We have tons of volunteers that do a lot of great work for our women. Donating, even if you can't donate money, donate your time. Those things make a difference for our victims, because we do need money to support them and, you know, get them everything that they need.
Yeah, so there's websites such as Faye Chalmers' site of Impact Virginia, where she dedicates herself to the education of folks on human trafficking. There's also the HEAL, H-E-A-L, trafficking, anti-trafficking website that has a lot of information. VCU puts on a human trafficking symposium every year in end of January, beginning of February. So there's many different ways to get educated, to educate other people, and again, just kind of using your spidey sense. Sometimes you're not gonna rescue them all the time, but sometimes if you just let them know, hey, we care, and we think something may be going on, and then maybe months later, maybe years later, you know, they'll come back for the help that they need. So it's not always instantaneous what happens, particularly with the adults, but just letting them know that somebody understands and somebody cares I have seen that get people out of the life.
And I would say come. I mean, you know, I wish every chair was full for this talk today. So I would say come out. You know, sometimes I've seen, you know, 5Ks that are to promote programs for the victims of human trafficking. I mean, when you see something, you know, get involved and tell people about it so that it won't be such a secret. So it won't be like, I'm not really going to deal with this, when we all really do need to deal with this. So that would be my suggestion. Thank you.
I mean, I think the most important thing to hit home is what we talked about, is this is the #2 most money-making crime in our nation. If we don't care about something, this is what we need to care about. They are selling our children, they are selling our women, they are selling our men, they are selling our boys. We need to care about this.
I just have a curious question. Have you ever had someone who is a trafficker try to work with the recovery places in order to recruit?
Well, I would, what we see in terms of what you're saying would be what's called a bottom. And a bottom is a woman that has been trafficked, but then becomes like the trafficker's #1 girl. And so she starts recruiting and she starts training, and young girls and women are gonna trust women more than men. And so we have to be careful of like who we allow in our shelter. Are they going to be bottoms coming to recruit? We don't always know, but we're very wary of those situations. So I would see that more than pimps or traffickers showing that.
And I would say you're very, very careful about who you let come to the.
100%.
And sometimes those women are the enforcers. Like sometimes they actually do more violence and hold the girls accountable and treat them horribly than the pimp that is in control. It's a very odd dynamic that someone that has been trafficked all of a sudden, and I've seen that.
Well, look at the high profile case that just came through.
That's true.
Yeah. What was the?
Well, about the bottom piece is that, I mean, it kind of makes sense, right? If I can stop having to have sex with this many men a night, and this is what I've got to do, I mean, it's terrible. They do become a criminal, and we do have to prosecute them, and many of them go to jail. We just had one of my girls' cases closed, and the bottom went to jail for 10 years. The pimp went for a lot longer, but to be honest, like she said, the bottom was more involved. She transported her down here from New York. She taught her. She bought her the outfits. She posted the ads. She ran it. And he was back in New York collecting the money and calling the shots. She got less time than him.
Well, all right, one more question and then we'll close it up.
So this is really traumatic work, and you kind of talked about that a little bit, and so I'm wondering how you yourselves deal with that. Either what brought you into it, maybe you were just really passionate about it, or how you navigate the trauma that you have to deal with every day, seeing with other people.
I mean, I would say for myself that people ask me that a lot, and it's kind of weird because there's other populations that I think I would struggle to work with, right? Like the elderly that get abused. I don't know, I can't deal with that. But for some reason, this is what I'm extremely passionate about. I will stand on this soapbox for the rest of my life and do this work. But I'm also in the position of kind of like the healing part, right? Like I'm in the recovery stages. I'm working with them to get them treatment, to get them help, to help their lives get better. So to me, I look at that as hope, you know, that we are helping these girls and these women and these men get the life that they deserve. So I like to look at it that way. And if one girl in this world that I have worked with goes on to lead a better life, then what I do is worth it.
I was very discouraged at the beginning, and I went to 2 or 3 of Faye Chummel's talks before I decided to jump in with 2 feet. And it was a story of someone who had been with her pimp for years. In fact, ended up having kids with the pimp and marrying him. Not that she wanted to, but it was one nurse midwife who, for her 3rd pregnancy, she was with her for 6 months, and she said, do you trust me enough to tell me something if something's going wrong? And she said, because I trusted her, I told her the truth. And I said, no. But the nurse midwife didn't stop. She said, I just want to let you know that if something is going wrong, we would be here for you. And so she said 6 months later, the cops surrounded the house. You know, they were always finding the house that they were running the girls out of and raiding it. And they knew the pimp always had a safe place to go to. He would run, he would get out of the way, the girls would save him. And she said, I think it was because of that interaction with the midwife that I saw the police circle the house, and I didn't say anything, and they rang the doorbell, and I opened it. and they arrested him, and it was not an easy way out, but that was the beginning, and it was that one seed of hope that person put into her.
Well, I want to thank you all very much for being here today, but also for what you do. And I just pray for God's strength and blessing as you go forward, that you keep doing what you're doing. And for us, I encourage you, like I'm encouraging every other group, if this is something you are passionate about, this is something that breaks your heart, find a way to get involved and do something. You know, volunteer your time, give money, but something to help, even if you can't be on the front line with the recovery or with the other side of it. Find what you can do and do it. And let's make human trafficking something that we don't have to talk about in the future because it doesn't exist. And let's just pray that that happens. So thank you all so much for being here, and thank you very much.